Does anybody remember what governance even means? Like what that word even means? Make decisions. Yeah. How is it different than? Well, what is governance like? I mean,
it depends on how you decide to govern.
Okay, but what kind of decisions?
Like larger decisions, not on a small scale, but more like it will affect like the well-being, or like it would affect the co-op or corporation or whatever.
Yeah.
Like on a large scale.
Yeah, that's right. There's a word for that. We call that policies. When you're making policies, then you're doing governance. And governance involves a lot of different things. It's different than management. And there's a lot of, it's useful to think of these two different things, governance and management, but it's also, there's some gray area there too. And sometimes it can be confusing what's considered governance and what's considered management, right? So for example, your co-op might have a policy. The policy might be, we always source locally grown ingredients when we can, right? That's a policy. But then a management decision might be, we're gonna buy hot peppers from over here this week instead of this one, right? So governance is about the policy, and management is about how the thing actually gets done. So the idea is that your board does governance, and the management and the workers do the business side, the management side. Okay? So everything is going to come back to that over and over again.
So would management kind of be like the smaller things?
Management is more about implementation, right? It's taking the policies that were established by the group and implementing what the group said that they wanted to do. So the policies are kind of like the rules that define the box, that define your options, and then within that box it's like, okay, we can do what we want, as long as we're not violating these policies. Yeah? So good governance, do you remember what I mentioned earlier on in Co-op Academy about liability and the corporate veil and your protections from liability? So what was that about? Who remembers what I said about that? About corporations and LLCs and liability.
I don't remember exactly how you establish it, but
Yeah.
you want to maintain correct liability coverage so that you as an individual are not responsible.
Right.
It always falls on the corporation.
Right. So liability protects you as liability protection in the form of incorporation protects you as an individual. So that's what this handout says, that good governance protects your standing as a corporation or an LLC, and that standing, that legal standing is what protects you guys individually, right, in case if there's like a lawsuit or something terrible happens. But good governance is also about building a firm infrastructure. So a lot of times in the beginning of a co-op, you might be like a group of friends and you're like, oh, we're just doing it, we're being loose, we're being friendly, we're being, we all like each other, we don't need to make all these rules. But then, before you know it, 5 years have gone by and there's a whole bunch of people there who weren't there in the beginning and they don't know why you did it that way, they weren't part of that rulemaking, they don't really agree with these rules. It's a whole different thing. So setting up governance structures in the beginning while you're all still friends is a good thing to try and do, because you're building a house for future generations of your co-op to live in, right? So basically 2 elements of good governance is have your rules and follow your rules. Okay? You gotta make rules and follow your rules. That's basically what this says, number 1 and number 2. So what does it mean to make your rules? The documents that define your co-op are on this handout. I'm going to get through this in more like 10 minutes. But that's fine. Maybe we'll be really early tonight. Documents that define your co-op. There's a bunch of documents on here that are considered governance documents, and only a couple that are considered management documents. So this is kind of like on your original checklist for starting a co-op. there's a bunch of, these are items on that checklist. And these are like legal documents that you need to put together in order to have your co-op recognized by the state or the city or wherever you are. So articles of incorporation or articles of organization are filed with the state, Massachusetts or Rhode Island, wherever you are. That establishes you as a legal entity aside from you guys as individuals. So that's important to do. And then on top of that, you may have to make a bylaws document, which is called an operating agreement if you're an LLC. And that's the document that defines your relationships to each other as members. It says what your rights and responsibilities are as members. That you don't have to file with the state. It actually depends on state to state. In Massachusetts, you don't have to file it with the state. You keep it in your own files. And then you have everybody who's a member of the co-op is going to eventually sign a membership agreement or get a certificate of stock. That's when you become a member of the co-op. You're going to have an actual piece of paper that's signed by you and the other people in your co-op that says you're a member, and then you have your rights as a member. Your annual report is something else that has to get filed with the state. The state wants to see this every year, and you have to pay a fee when you file it. If you don't file these annual reports, this is really common for every kind of startup organization. If you don't file these annual reports, they will eventually dissolve your corporation without your knowledge or without your consent. So if usually it takes 5, 7, 10 years before that happens. But if you haven't shown any activity with the state, they're going to say that your corporation no longer exists. If your corporation no longer exists, what also doesn't exist?
The bail.
That liability protection I was talking about. So if there's no veil between you and litigation. It's just you out in the world doing business saying, please sue me if something goes wrong. Okay? So even though it seems like such a small thing and it seems like there's no consequence for it, to file your annual report, you get a little postcard in the mail every year. And it's this tiny little thing, it looks like a card for a dentist appointment that says you gotta file your annual report. You can do it online, it's really no big deal. It costs $140 usually. I think that's if you do it late. If you do it on time, it's $105. But I always pay the late fee.
What does that look like? Is it like a 990?
You actually can do it online. And all it is you fill out the forms. All they want you to do, it's not the kind of annual report that you would do for a nonprofit. That's meant for your funders and meant to tell people what you did this year. It's a really basic document that just updates who your current board of directors are. Have you issued any more shares of stock? It's a pretty basic thing, and you do it online and you pay the fee.
So is the fee a processing fee, or is that a tax or an annual cost
annual
of
report
being
in Massachusetts? The annual report has a fee. It's just a fee for the annual report. It's probably a filing fee. Like I said, I think it's $105 or $110.
Pushes the button for $100.
Right. And then there is also a corporate tax that's around $450 that corporations pay. I think an LLC pays something different. Anybody know what the annual fee is for an LLC?
500.
It's 500. So it's something like that. So you have to pay both of those. You pay the $450 annual fee and your annual incorporation, your annual report fee. And if you don't do that for a whole number of years, you're eventually, people are gonna, you might get a letter saying that your corporation has been dissolved. And this happens to a lot of groups, but it's easy to avoid and you might as well just do it. It's embarrassing if you don't do it. You look up this is all public information, by the way, so anytime you file this, anybody can look this up on the internet, on the mass.gov website, to see whether you file these things. And so, sometimes you look up an organization and it's this year they filed annual reports for the past 8 years all in 1 year. You know that those people didn't realize they were supposed to be doing this, and they did 8 of them in 1 year. So don't be that bad. Business plan. Everybody knows what a business plan is. This is not exactly a policy document, but it's kind of a steering document, So it is kind of a governance level document. It's something that you want your board and your members to approve. And then it's the job of your management to implement. And then two more things, your member policies, your employee and member policies. A lot of co-ops don't get around to actually writing these down, but it's really important that you do. There's a lot of resources available for these, both in the world of regular businesses and also on usworker.coop, which is the US Federation of Worker Co-ops. They have a whole resource library section that includes examples of employee policies from worker cooperatives, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel, you don't have to start from scratch. There's ones out there. And if you have a hard time finding them, let me know and I can help that along.
What was that site you just mentioned?
It's called usworker.coop.
I'll send a
Is that
link
right?
with the, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I'll send a link to that specific page.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, so what's on the annual report?
The annual report is very little information. It's just you're updating your address, who's on the board of directors, whether you issued any more shares of stock, stuff like that. Anything that would be a change in your articles of incorporation from the top. So it's just an update. It's an update to your articles. And then the last one, really a lot of co-ops, a lot of businesses in general don't get around to doing, but I really recommend that you do, which is your operating manual. And your operating manual, you know how we talked about, or you guys talked about business systems last week, right? So tell me about what went down with the business systems exercise last week. What did you take away from that? Yeah.
Well, for our co-op, because we're making a food product,
Yep.
the system that we use to make our product is pretty regulated,
Yeah.
and so we have to register our process with the FDA.
Wow. Okay.
And so
Yep.
that, it's kind of good because it's forcing us to do it, but we have to create this really detailed manual that explains how we make our product and that also explains what the different options are. There's a failure at different steps. So if we tested the pH of our hot sauce and we found that it was off, what we would do. Or if we got a complaint from someone we sold to, how are we going to recall our product? And so we have to write that and submit it on the plan.
Right. All right. So that's a really great example, right? So the government's making you do that. You probably wouldn't have done it otherwise, but it's going to be a really good resource. And now it's going to be written down so anybody who comes into the cooperative is going to be able to say, it's this is how we do things here. This is how it's done. And that's what an operating manual is. It's like a place where somebody can go to say, this is how we do things here. And you take all those systems that you worked out, you recognize that you need a system, you developed a system, you made the system, you used it, and then you evaluated it, and so you put all of that in your operating manual so that people know this is how we do stuff here.
Okay, so the employee policies is human resources, and
Yep.
this is just a very practical.
Yep.
This is how our
It
systems
can be.
work.
Yep. It's your systems about. It can be your systems about how paper moves through the office, what happens when somebody sends an inquiry, and then also how do we do our work? What are our work standards? When I worked in construction, we had a book like this. That was our quality standards. That had some basic stuff that people in our company needed to know. Your big barrier always goes inside your insulation. Stuff like that. So it's stuff that's important for people to know so they don't make mistakes in doing their job. So, anybody got questions about these documents? It's a lot of writing. There's a lot of papers involved, and I don't expect that you'll get this all done in the first, however long. It usually takes people a couple of years before they actually write down their operating procedures, although I think you'll be doing well if you do it as quickly as you can. So, questions? Rather sleepy today. You stayed up late watching baseball?
It was 2 nights ago.
I know.
It wasn't that late. Actually, the game got over early.
Watching basketball. Yeah, right. Tonight's basketball, right?
No.
Or last night?
Game 6 tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Starting at
basketball started
8:07.
last night? Okay.
Not that we care.
Yeah. Maybe we'll, alright. I think we'll all be able to catch the game, so it'll be good. Okay, so where was I? Okay, so we're under elements of good governance. We created all of our documents, right? The second thing we gotta do is pay attention to our documents and do what it says, what they say. So for example, here's some things that co-ops often overlook because it doesn't seem that important, or it seems like a silly formality, and why would we even need to do this, you know? So, you know, for example, if you're in a cooperative that meets regularly every week, you know, sorry?
Okay.
Sorry, the first page, the practicing good governance, we're back there. You know, it might be silly to say, okay, now we've got to stop what we're doing, like not do our regular weekly meeting, and now we've got to have this weird, you know, annual meeting. It's got all these formalities, and why do we have to do this? Because we meet together every week anyway. The answer is because this is what protects you. This is what guarantees the status of your corporation, and that's what protects you from liability. So you have to have a formal annual meeting. You'd be really surprised at what the requirements are of that. You have to let people know way ahead of time that it's happening. You have to set the agenda way ahead of time. You have to notify people in writing usually, or by email. And then usually at the annual meeting you have your board election. And then your board has to have regular meetings, and you have to write down the minutes of your meetings, both from the annual meetings and your board meetings, and make sure that you keep those in an accessible place where everybody has access to them. So these are the kind of things that often get overlooked, but they're going to become important over time. I even know of one co-op. There's a co-op called South Mountain Company on Martha's Vineyard. Has anybody heard of this? It's a very successful, you should hear about this. It's a very successful construction company that specializes in energy efficient building. The owner, the original owner who sold it to the employees to turn it into a cooperative, his name was John Abrams, and he wrote a book called The Company We Keep. I was in a workshop that he did, and they've been around now for like 25 years, and they have like 30 members. So they've had annual meetings and they keep their minutes of all their meetings, but especially, you know, 25 years ago, they weren't even using computers. It was all on paper or it was typed out. So they have these like huge binders of their meeting minutes. And it got so overwhelming, they were like, we have all these minutes, but they're not doing us any good if we have to like go searching through stacks and stacks of paper to find the information about what happened. So they're also a very successful co-op that makes a lot of money. You know what they did? They hired an indexer, the kind of person who like puts an index in a book. Like it's somebody's job to go through a book and write the index, right? And figure out like what are all the key terms that people might look up.
Oh my God.
They hired a professional indexer to come in to look at 25 years worth of their annual reports and create an index. And they have that person come back every year so that the index is updated. Wow. So that's a serious commitment to good governance. They want those minutes accessible to anybody in the cooperative to be able to go back and look up a decision that they made even that long ago. So it's not that hard for us these days because we have computers and we can search for that stuff. We can search for keywords and stuff like that. So fortunately, you don't have to hire an indexer. But it's good practice. The very least you need to do is keep all that stuff. Yeah.
Is it required that all board meeting notes be available to all members of the cooperative? Like, what if there was a board meeting regarding a topic that it wouldn't be like an HR or everyone's?
Yeah. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head.
I don't think so. I think annual meeting notes and decisions need to be made public to all members, but I don't think board.
And the requirement.
I don't know.
I think it's a decision that you can make from the corporation.
You have to decide that.
Yeah, I remember when we incorporated the co-op, we were asked that question.
Yeah.
Or
You could decide.
you could decide if you wanted to keep, and I think we had something in there saying that if it was a meeting that needed to be specifically, you know, excluded to everyone, so then you have to put it there. So you could have meetings that were closed for a personal issue or something you were dealing at that point, but you have to put there why.
Yeah, that's a really
So
good question.
the requirement to keep minutes on file is a legal requirement or just best practices?
That's, it's usually in your bylaws. It's usually written in your bylaws, and I believe it's written in your bylaws because I guess I can't say for sure that it's the law, but it's certainly expected. And if you know, again, it's so unlikely that you're going to get sued or end up in court, but if you did, you know, it's important that you have these things in place. So, so if you didn't have those things in place, if you hadn't been taking minutes, and somebody wanted to sue you, they would come in and say, are you respecting the formalities of your corporation? Are you filing annual minutes? Are you having annual report? Are you filing annual reports, having annual meetings? Can you show me where your minutes are kept? And if you can't do that stuff, they're going to say, there is no corporation here. I don't see a corporation here. I just see a bunch of yahoos working. And we're going to come after you personally. So this is how you show that you're a legit organization. Alright? Okay. And it doesn't have to be super extensive. You don't have to say like every single little thing that somebody said at a meeting. You know, you just want to note any major decisions they made. Okay. So just one more thing, and then we're moving on. So this co-op accountability structures, it's a lot of writing, but there's one thing that I just want you to see that you can see from far away. So there's, anybody see a circle in here? I want you to see that there's a circle. There's a circle within these squares. Okay?
Gotcha.
So we're going to start at the top. And at the top are the workers. So when I started making this chart, I did it as a top to bottom thing with arrows pointing downwards. But then the problem is with a co-op, once you get to the bottom, the arrow goes all the way back to the top again. So it's really a circular diagram, right? So you start with the workers. Everybody who works there is generally eligible to become a member. So but there are usually some workers who are not members yet. And that's usually because they just haven't been there that long. So the member box is inside the worker box because all of the members are going to be workers. There's no one who's a member who's not a worker in a strictly worker co-op. If it's a hybrid, that's a different thing. So all of the members are workers. The membership are the people who elect the board, right? And they have an election every year. They elect who their board members are. If there's only 5 people in the co-op, they might have just elect themselves and say the 5 of us are the board. They can also elect people from outside of the membership if they want to. If you decide you'd like people who are outside of your business to serve on your board, you can decide to do that.
I have a quick question on that.
Yeah.
I was going to ask it a couple weeks ago, but for like taking on a board for like, for instance, like we do landscaping,
Yeah.
like how will we, like what's the draw to someone to like join a board for a landscaping company?
I think that there's not going to be much draw for them to join your actual board, your legal board. If anything, there's liability for them there that they don't necessarily want and not a lot of other stuff. So you can also create a thing called an advisory board, which is a group of people who want to help you out, who want to help out your business, but who aren't going to work there and who don't want to assume any legal responsibility. And that might be more what you're looking for. Those would be people in the industry, people who want to help create jobs, people who want to, you know, do something good in the neighborhood.
So in that case, the board on paper would be internal.
Yep. Yeah. So the people who are legally, the board is a really important thing because these are the people who are legally responsible for this entity, right? An advisory board is a completely non-legal function. It's just people who agree to give you some advice from time to time. But it's a really good way to like reach out to the community and have kind of your ambassadors out there and get a lot of great information in. So that's not on here because it's not really part of the legal structure, but it's a great thing to do. So then what happens is that the board oversees the management, right? The management, maybe you do have a manager or maybe you all collectively manage. But either way, there's a thing called the management that has to be thought of as separate from the board, okay? Yeah.
This is, at least from my limited experience, in our co-op it looks like the workers are going to be the membership and they're going to be the board and they're going to be the management.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay, so we just assume different roles.
Yes. And what you need to do is, every co-op has this problem, and this is where I said, you know, it sounds like ridiculous formalities, but what co-ops are usually advised to do is to go ahead and have your informal, regular member meeting every week or however often you do. Make sure that you have an annual meeting. A lot of people make their annual meeting into a party. It could be a fun celebration, and then you take 5 minutes to do your business, and then take 3 hours to have a party. And then your board meetings once a month. That can be the trickier thing to separate out your regular working meetings, your worker owner meetings, from your board meetings. And a lot of groups will just have kind of a formality where there's like, they kind of both are happening at the same time, you know? So you're doing your informal meeting, things are happening, and then you're like, oh, this is a board decision. So then we're like, oh, secretary, you gotta get out the secretaries, and then we write down in the minutes that this happened, and now we're in a board meeting, and now we adjourn the board meeting, and we're back in our regular meeting. People do that. It's because of the world that we live in that the co-op model doesn't really fit into the legal structures that are available. So that's the way people do it. But it's very fluid. Like I said, you might be all of these people. The same group of people might be all of these. I want you to be aware that there are different roles, different hats that you're wearing at different times. And I just want you to be aware of which thing you're doing at which time, because it has different implications. Okay? So that's really about it. I mean, I wanted you to understand the circularity of this. This is a kind of, like the U.S. government is supposedly, these checks and balances. So you won't find this circularity in other kinds of businesses, right? Other businesses are just like, I'm your boss and you're his boss and you're that one's boss and I'm at the top and you're at the bottom and this is just the way it goes. But in a co-op, it's more of a circular thing. So everybody kind of has somebody that they're accountable to, and everybody has somebody that's kind of answering to them. Yeah.
I have a question. Is there a limit to how many people you can have on a board?
Good question. I don't think there's a legal. I don't know of a legal limit.
Or like percentage.
But there's definitely no. There's definitely like best practices in that area. And a lot of people say anywhere from like 7 to 15 is a good size for a board. So basically what co-ops usually do is when you start out, you might only be 3 or 5 or 7 people. Usually it just makes sense for all of you guys to be on the board, and you just elect yourselves to the board and you just say, we're having a board meeting now, But you want to set that up because if your co-op grows bigger, before you know it, you're 25 people, and having a 25-person board meeting is a little trickier, and you don't really want to do that. You want to set up your procedures in place.
I guess I'm just wondering because, I'm thinking like if the co-op grows and you have more people, like say we do have 25 members, like my impression is I would want everyone to be a board member for the sake of horizontality. And it seems like by having a board, you're creating a hierarchy that I thought we were trying to avoid that.
Okay.
I don't know how that plays out in other
That's
co-ops.
a good question. So the membership is really the bottom line. They're the ultimate governing body in the co-op is the membership. The membership only delegates the powers that they want to the board, right? So the members are the ones who have all the power in the co-op until they say, okay, you board people, we're going to write in our bylaws that you guys are authorized to make these certain decisions. If it's not in those bylaws, you're not authorized to do it. And we still reserve that right? And then the board kind of does the same thing with the management. The board delegates to the management and says, you're allowed to make all the choices you want within these certain parameters. And outside of that, you're not allowed. So it's like from the membership. So everybody in your co-op is going to be a member. And they pass along as much authority as they want to the next group down around the circle, right? So if you have 25 members and you want it to be a very horizontal organization, you could say that you have a 25-member board. Or you could make your board really a ceremonial kind of thing and just keep most of the rights in the membership and keep most of the decision-making power in the membership. And then you have to have a board because it's that legal, you're legally required to. But you can do whatever you want with it. You could make it all 25 people, or you could make it 3 people who have very little power. So you can organize it how you want. So, okay. If there's no more questions,
I have one more question.
Yeah.
Would there be an issue, like, let's say for instance there was a co-op that there was like 10 people who were there for like the first 5 years, and then like a bunch of people joined on after 5 years. Would it be weird if those first people were the board and the management, and it stayed that way? Would that, to what she was saying about the power, I think the power dynamic might be weird.
Yeah, well, you have to have board elections every year, so there would be an opportunity for new people to join the board. You wouldn't be able to like lock yourself in as one of the board members, right?
That's a good question.
It would be weird.
Yeah, I mean, there's is it legal, and then there's is it weird. I mean, I think that I think it's the weirdness that's really the problem. Like, is that going to disempower the new people who come in? And I think the answer is yeah, definitely. In fact, I know of a co-op that's having this that's been having this problem for the last 20 years.
So as a rule, those two groups should definitely be different. If nothing else, the board and the management should be separate groups of people.
Okay, I see what you mean.
That's my question, really. That's why I asked.
It really all depends on your organization. I mean, I would say the more likely, the larger the organization, the more likely it is that those are going to be different people. But you should just be clear about who's doing what at what time. But yeah, I mean, this question of new people and integrating new people into this whole dynamic is a really important one if you want your co-op to survive over the years. Because all of you who are founders of the co-op are going to really feel possessive over it, And when new people come in, you might be tempted to say things like, we've always done it that way. Stop asking so many questions. We've already figured this out. We spent hours on this 2 years ago, and I don't want to go over it again, So that's a good reason to write down your minutes, because you can say, check out the minutes, we did talk about this at a meeting, and if you have any questions, let's bring it up again. But this co-op that I know of has not been able to get new people to stick for years and years. Because some of the people have been there for 10 or 15 years, they have a long waiting period before new employees are allowed to become members. They have to work there for 2 years before they become members, and usually they don't make it because they feel so disempowered by the whole thing that they're like, forget it, I'm out of here.
Hasn't it dawned on them, if they're concerned about the turnover, that maybe they should change that?
You think?
Just saying.
A lot of people have said it to them.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, so we're started out good, but now we're a little overtime. So we're going to move on to the next section. So Shane is going to talk to you about unions.